Welcome to the Atom Ventures podcast. My name is Mark Patel. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Atom Ventures, and today I'm here with Mark Peacock.
Hi, Berev. Great to be here. My name's Mark Peacock. I'm the pricing coach. Lovely to be here with you this afternoon.
So, as you said, you are the pricing coach, and we're going to talk about all things pricing. I know that we came across you when we were talking to. I can't remember actually how did we come across you?
I think maybe you came to one of my webinars, or LinkedIn or something like that.
It's definitely LinkedIn, and so we sent the team out sent the guys out to do your sessions, and the feedback was fantastic. And I remember I came into one of your webinars, and it was great. So today, what we're going to do is talk about pricing, because I think it's something that's very much dear to our hearts as Atom CTO, Atom Ventures, but also is to a lot of the companies that we work with and work for. So before we get into the actual pricing piece, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mike? How did you become a pricing expert?
Yeah, so a good question. So I've got a background in corporate life, I guess, like many people. So 25 years in various big brands like the AA and DHL. And I was in marketing, I was in product management, and I ran a business division, 25 million pound revenue, over 100 people, full P&L responsibility. And within that time, price always played a part in what I did, whether it's about having a special offer in marketing or structuring your product range or managing a business, managing a P&L. So when I left 3 years ago, and I was looking around for what to do next, I realized there was nobody really talking about price, particularly in the SME market. There's lots of business coaches, lots of marketing gurus, lots of financial advisors, and they might touch on price, but nobody really specializing in it. So I thought, I think I know a bit about that, so that's what I'm going to do. So that's how I came into it. It was a kind of eureka moment when I thought, price. Nobody talks about price. Yet for me, it's the most important part of anybody's business.
It is weird that, because I remember when I first started out as a contractor, and even when I first started at Atom, the one book was $1 Million Consulting, right? So that talks a lot about pricing and how you set your pricing, and how you list your pricing. But then, as you say, no one else really after that has done anything.
No, I mean, there are a few experts in America, like the guy you just mentioned, and in Germany they're very hot on pricing, and France to a lesser extent. But I think in the UK, I think we're slightly behind the curve, to be honest with you. There are a few other people that I've come across now in the UK that do a similar thing to me. And there's some medium-sized pricing consultancies, and they tend to work for, some of the bigger brands. But for the SME space, particularly, for solopreneurs, startups, entrepreneurs, there's hardly anything. And what I'm trying to show people is that, A, pricing is the most important part of your business, and B, that there are lots of things you can do to make a big difference, and they don't have to be difficult or scary.
So do you think it's a typically British thing that we are scared of pricing and talking about money?
Possibly, I don't know. But from my observations, I have seen, I do think they are more advanced in the discipline of pricing in America and Germany, for definite. Also Australia, and a couple of the other European countries, France and Spain. And I don't see such a degree of pricing expertise in the UK. It does exist, but it tends to be the domain of the big consultancies, McKinsey, Bain, all of these kind of people. And obviously they're working for large corporates, and I don't see it so much at the smaller end of the scale. So whether it's a British reserve or a fear, I don't know. But part of my mission is to educate, particularly the SME market, and show people that there's lots of different ways that you can think about pricing, and they don't have to be difficult or scary, and they will make a big difference to what you do.
Okay, so if we're going to take back the basics of pricing, so what are the key fundamentals here when you're looking at a pricing strategy?
Yeah, so I think the most basic mistake that most businesses do is they start with what I call an inside-out mentality. In other words, they think the way to work out your price is to understand your costs, or to think about your profit and revenue targets, and then work out your prices accordingly. And the trouble with that is that that's got nothing to do with customer value. So what I try and share with people is that pricing is all about customer value, and it has very little to do with cost. If it costs service. If you know that somebody is willing to pay £100 for what you do, yet it only costs you £10 to deliver, at what price should you sell your service? Well, the answer is still £100. If you know that somebody's willing to pay for what you do at £100, yet it costs you £150 to deliver the service, at what price can you sell it? Well, it's still only £100. So value is fundamentally in the eye of the beholder, i.e. the customer, and it has very little to do with how much it costs you to provide or to deliver that service. So it's breaking that link between an internal mentality for constructing your prices and doing what I call an outside-in view of pricing, which is customer-focused and customer-based.
So, I mean, the problem that you have, right, is that, I mean, I was in a conversation yesterday where someone said to me, so what's your rate card? What is your rate? And they said, how much does it cost per month? And my answer to him was, following in your, following your lessons is, well, it's a bit like cost of a piece of string, right? What do you need? And so for us, it was a question of, before we get into any pricing, what's the day rate? So it's actually really, what do you actually need and what value can we bring to you? But that doesn't go down too well all the time. So how do you get around that piece, that conversation?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think the thing with pricing is you've also got to get better at selling to get better at pricing. And what I mean by that is you've got to get better at uncovering value in the sales conversation. So if you find that somebody is asking you very early on, what's your rate card? Already that's telling you that they are going to be a highly price sensitive buyer. Yeah, so very early on, they're already wanting to know how much you charge, right? What's your rate card? What's your day rate? What's your hourly rate? So it depends on the situation, and there's a number of different ways you can deal with it. So if you judge that the situation will allow for an expanded conversation, you can respond by saying, well, look, I'll happily tell you, what my prices are. But before I do that, I'd just really like to know a bit more about your business, just to make sure that I really understand what your needs are, and then I can provide you with some indicative prices or costings, if that's okay. Or if they're really insistent, then at some point you do have to answer the question, what is your rate card? But far better, if you can, to move away from just saying, well, it's £100 an hour, it's £1,000 a day, to, well, we offer a range of packages, depending on the needs, and give some indicative prices. Or if you're really pushed, one of my best tips is to say, well, our fees range from anything from £2,000 to £20,000, depending on what you're looking for. And actually, that final tip is probably my go-to response when people ask me for an indication on price. And that's fair enough, right? Because people want to know what ballpark you're in, and if there's an overlap. So by giving a wide range, you're giving an indication of the lowest price point that you might be willing to engage with them, but also you're setting a high price anchor for the range of value-added services that you could offer as well. So, a couple of different ways to respond there, I would suggest.
No, and I think that's really interesting, because when you're talking about different price offerings, let's say, different kind of offerings that you can give, that I find, so we started doing that, and I think it brings a great benefit to our business, simply because it allows us to think about what are the actual added value pieces that we do within the organisation. But what you often find is that we might look at it from a point of view, well, we'll add in an extra service or extra kind of task that will cost more money. But then a lot of the customers will look at it, that task, therefore they'll basically use that price model to try and figure back how much each task costs, even though that's not how we've costed it. So you get into that pitfall, though, don't you, really, where consumers just come back at you and they say, oh, well, if we take this out, does it cost this?
Yes, absolutely. There is that risk, but I think I would far rather be having that conversation than what's your hourly rate. So I'd far rather be, discussing a range of options, an entry package, a standard package, and a premium package with 3 different prices, and having a conversation. And typically, the way that conversation will go, the prospective client will say, well, look, I love the idea of your premium offer, Bhairav, but it's way too expensive. So I'm probably going to take one of the 2 cheaper ones. So for the cheapest option, if we took that, but I really like the idea of having this feature over here that's only available in the premium package. So would you be able to do that? Well, generally speaking, the answer is of course yes. So rather than you just paying £2,000 for the entry package, you might stick on another £500,000 or whatever the number is to bring in that additional feature. But the point is, you've moved the conversation on from, in the client's mind, from am I going to buy from you, yes or no, to I'm thinking of buying from you, which option am I going to take? And that's an important but subtle distinction, because it moves you away from a cost-focused decision to an investment-focused decision. Does that make sense? And also you're getting to understand what's really important to this buyer and why. And you can have a much better conversation as a result.
But Mark, there's going to be people on this, listening to this podcast saying, well, my accountant, my shareholders, my investors, they're all looking at revenue, and they're looking at revenue and costs. So how do I price it? Because that could mean it's multiple. I can't show any stability in this. And so therefore, how do I know, how can I show returns to the other investors in that business? Because obviously what you're saying has a lot of truth in it. But if you're looking for something that is recurring, let's say, as a revenue, a predictable revenue, that becomes more difficult, doesn't it?
I'm not sure it does, to be honest with you. I think there's loads of different ways to price what you do, particularly, for service companies, whether it's a project fee, a retainer, or a subscription fee. There's loads of different ways. So I would, first and foremost, in answer to that, I would say, make sure you've picked the optimum pricing or monetization strategy for your business. So subscription pricing is very big at the moment, because people think it's a great way to get recurring revenue, and if done correctly, it can work very well. But in terms of justifying or demonstrating a return for your investors, for you as the business owner, the other thing to remember is, price has the biggest lever for increasing your profits, bar none. So McKinsey famously say that for every 1% improvement in price, you can get a 10% improvement in your net profits. Yeah. So if I just give you a very quick example, so let's imagine we've got a business with £10 million of revenue and £1 million of net profit, right? So if I put 1% on the price, on the revenue goes up by £100,000, from 10 million to 10 million and £100,000, right? But all of that increase all falls through to the bottom line. So your profit has now gone up from 1 million to 1.1 million. So that's a 10% increase in your net profits in return for a 1% improvement in price. Now, when you think of it like that, what other metric in your business KPIs can deliver such a return and do it so quickly? There isn't one. So pricing is the most powerful profit lever, and when applied correctly and over the long term, it will deliver far greater returns to you as a business owner or to your investors or shareholders than anything else. So that would be my advice on that point.
And I think there you've touched on something very important, and that's how people structure their business, right? And how they so that really only works if you've got your cost model down. You understand your cost model, and because essentially what you're saying is increasing margin, right? And once you've increased margin, all bets are off. That's great, because it doesn't matter. As you say, every pound isn't just an extra pound, right? Yeah. But I think a lot of small business owners today are not really looking at it that way. They're looking at the cost profit model rather than the margin model.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's part of the message I'm trying to get across, because I guess as either if you're working in sales or if you're selling your services, the temptation is to think, well, I need this business. I'm talking to a prospect. I need this business. This business is worth £1,000 to me. If I discount it by 10%, that's only £100. I still get 900 quid. That sounds fine. I'll do it, right? But if at a revenue level, a 10% discount sounds doable. But if you assess the same sum at a net profit level, it has a far greater impact on your net profits. And people don't do that sum. So, I can't, trying to think of a good example, but if on £1,000, for a service-based business, you might make, let's say 500 quid for sake of argument, gross profit margin. Well, you knock £100 off the top line, you're now only making 400 quid.
Yeah.
So it's a 20% reduction on your net profit or your gross profit margin. So the impact on profit is always greater for any discount in price. And of course, the reverse is true for any increase. You don't have to go too far with increasing your prices to make a big difference to the bottom line.
So how are you on discounting and, buy one, get one free type thing within a pricing structure? I guess it's with services, it's obviously doable. Obviously with products, it's easy, right? You buy one, get one free is that model. But in services, are you hot on discounts? Are you saying that no, that you shouldn't be offering them? You should be offering the tiered models?
So I think yes, I think in answer to your question, I think the danger with discounts is that they're uncontrolled. And I hear this a lot in kind of medium-sized SMEs where they've got a small sales team, so 5 to 10 people, and the MD or the sales director will say to me, our discounts range anything from 5% to 50% off list price. Yeah, we know what our gross margins are, and the sales teams have, total autonomy on how much they can discount. And that worries me hugely when I hear that, because that's completely uncontrolled. And the simplest thing you can do in that instance is to just write out your discount policy. So what kind of business deserves what kind of discounts? And then you stick to that and you enforce it. And if you can incentivize your sales teams to sell on gross profit margin rather than revenue and volume, they're not going to sacrifice price for chasing the revenue and the volume. So for that kind of business, simple things like writing out your discount policy and halving the discounts that you give away is a really good tip. For a smaller business, a service business who might not have a small sales team, I would encourage people to avoid talking about discounting. I never say never, because sometimes if you need the business, you need the business. But it's far better, I would say, to think about a tiered pricing model where you've got 3 price points, and most of the time you want people to buy the middle price point. So let's say you've got 3 price points of an entry price of £1,000, a middle price of £2,000, and a premium price of £5,000. And you design those deliberately in line with what you think your customer's level of willingness to pay is. And if you come across somebody who's price sensitive, you know that they are likely going to only be interested in the lowest price option you've got in your range. And they either like it or they don't. And I would avoid getting into the discussion around, can you knock 10% off? And say, well, look, those are the options. Which one best meets your needs and why? And having a detailed sales conversation around what are their value levers, what's important to them and why, and getting to understand their business better rather than just doing the easy knee-jerk response of discounting. And the final message here, anybody can sell cheap, right? Anybody can sell the cheapest thing in the market. It doesn't take any brains or effort to sell the cheap. You only have to go down the fruit and vegetable market, and all the guys there are selling 3 for £2, right? Because that's all they know. Anybody can sell cheap. It takes a bit of brains, a bit of thought, and a bit of effort to sell value, and therefore better pricing. So don't get sucked into the cheaper price game. Always try and compete on value, not price. So hopefully that makes sense.
So talking about value, I mean, when I remember reading when I read the $1 Million Consultant book, he was very hot on let's say shared profits in a way, shared impact. So taking revenue from the amount of impact that you make to a company, and that's something I was very interested in doing, but it's very hard to quantify. Is that something that you would recommend for people to do, or is it only really something reserved for people who are very, very specialised in certain areas?
Well, I think there's 2 angles there. I think when you're talking about a pricing model that includes a share of revenue, that is quite hard to do and to implement. And also you've got to be very clear on who the ideal client is for that, because they've got to be willing to meet you halfway on this. So what that could look like is you say, well, we'll do a project, we'll do an engagement, and I'm only going to charge you 50% of my normal project fee, but in return, I would like to take 1% of any increase in revenue that you generate over the next 12 months, for example. Obviously it will vary depending on the specifics of, your service and what the benefits are. But as I said, you've got to, the hardest part of that is finding the right client to have that conversation with. In terms of the book that you were referring to, and it's a brilliant book, I would encourage everybody to read it. A simpler version of that is what Alan Weiss calls value pricing, value selling. And what he means by that is, if you can have a conversation with a client and say, look, I'm going to give you a new website, and it's going to give you 1,000 new leads, and that's going to be, you have the conversation, what's that worth to you? And they say, well, that over a year, that could be worth £1 million to me. And the trick then is to price the value of your service in line with the value of the outcome to the client. And a good rule of thumb here is if you can find a 10-to-1 ratio. So what I mean by that is if the client is willing to accept that they will earn or generate at least £1 million of new business as a result of your service and your service only, you should feel able to quote them a fee that's 10% of that value. In other words, £100,000 or whatever numbers are appropriate for your business. So the pitch, if you like, is a 10-to-1 return. So they are going to spend £100,000 and get £1 million in return. That's the deal. That's the pitch that you're proposing to them. And again, it's got to be positioned along the lines of, where else are you going to get such a return for your money? There is no, other than working with me, there is no other way that you will get a 10-to-1 return on this kind of project, this kind of deal. So that, I think that's what he was alluding to in his book. It's that kind of 10-to-1 return, or that 10-to-1 ratio between the value of the outcome to the client and the fee that you set for the project. So clearly, on that point, the fee that I'm setting in that instance has absolutely nothing to do with how much it's going to cost me to deliver. So I've not used my day rate, my hourly rate, or brought into play an estimate of the number of days or hours it's going to take me to deliver. Clearly, you have to know that at that price, you're going to make more than enough margin for it to be worth your while. So you already need to know in your head, you've got to have a good mental picture of the resource implications for the service that you're providing. But equally, it's got that, using that, it takes some skill and some practice to pricing that. So I wouldn't encourage anybody to do that if they're just starting out. You need to find your feet first. That is what I will call an advanced pricing strategy, and it's an advanced selling strategy. But that's the principle. That's what he means by it, and it does work better for high ticket consulting businesses, which is the kind of business that he was talking about in that book. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, that it does, and yeah, it's quite eye-watering, some of the deals he was talking about.
Yeah,
for sure. So okay, one of the key things that brings out then is the whole imposter syndrome piece, because a lot of people will be scared to price because they don't value themselves in that way. Do you have any tips on how people can get over that?
Definitely. So this is a really good point, and particularly for people that are just starting out, or that they've come out of corporate life and they're just starting out their new business. And I come across this all the time, and it's linked to self-worth, right? So the belief is that because I'm new in this market, I can't charge very much. Well, I say cobblers to that. There's two ways to think about reacting to that. The first one is, if you have got a background in corporate or wherever else, and you're bringing that to the party, don't forget that that's what people are buying into. Yeah. So I was talking to a lady who was just starting out as a project management consultant, and she had a 25-year career in high-powered blue chip organizations as a project manager. And she said, Mark, I don't feel I can charge more than £300 a day or whatever the number was because I'm brand new. I said, hang on a second. You've got 25 years of blue chip experience. you should be charging a premium for what you do. And I don't know what the going rates are for project managers, so I'm just making up the numbers here. But, so I encouraged her to rethink her whole attitude to price and work out a way to charge, anything from £500 to £1,000 a day, or whatever numbers she finally set on, because people buy into the whole you. They buy all of your skills and experience, all of your background, all of your expertise, all of your reputation, all of your brand. So set a price in line with that. The second way to think about that is that if you are brand new and you don't have a corporate background to draw upon, what I want people to do is to work, rather than saying, well, I'm brand new and I'm a marketing consultant or I'm an XYZ consultant, but I'm brand new, so I'm going to start at the bottom of the price ladder and work my way up. If you start at the bottom, it will take you years to work your way up. So my challenge to you is, how can you redesign and repackage what you do to pitch yourself either in the middle or at the top end of your market? Now, that sounds a bit weird when you first hear that, but I always say to people, don't think about starting at the bottom, think about starting at the top. But then the trick is to work out how you can add more value for your customers in your niche with your set of skills and services. So it's more about your positioning and the value of what you bring to the party. So I would always encourage people to work out how they can start at the top rather than the bottom. That then forces you to answer the question, what are we good at? And why should people pay this? And if you do that correctly, people always suffer from imposter syndrome, right? To a degree, that will never go away. But it'll give you a lot more confidence in your pricing strategy if you have a well thought through approach and you've clearly thought about it, you've clearly understood what your customers want, need and value, what they're willing to buy, how your product or service is better or different to the competition, and what value you bring to the party. So always encourage people to go, price up rather than price down, and take confidence from that because you've done the thinking. Yeah, does that make sense?
It does indeed. And to your earlier point about the lady who was a project manager, I remember reading somewhere the other day that a guy had posted, you're not paying me for 1 hour's work, you're paying me for 25 years experience to do that work.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there was Picasso, there's an example of Picasso doing that. The story goes, a lady goes up to him in a cafe and asks him to do a quick sketch on a napkin, and he does, and it takes, like 30 seconds, and he asks her for 300 euros or whatever the currency was back then, and says, how on earth can you charge that? That only took you 30 seconds. And of course he goes, madam, it took me 30 years to do that drawing, and that's absolutely right. And there's another one about a guy who advised Henry Ford on car production design, and he put in a bill for $10,000 to put a mark on the assembly line as to where they needed to make a change. And then Henry Ford said, how can you justify $10,000 for one mark? So he changed the invoice, and he put $1 for doing the mark, $9,999 for knowing where to put the mark.
Yeah.
And it's your expertise and the value that you bring that we're pricing, not how long it takes you to do the job. And that's a really important distinction.
Definitely. So we've talked a lot about services. How does all of this translate to SaaS or a product style pricing?
Yeah, so SaaS is a really interesting area for pricing at the moment because a lot of it is very visible. Lots of online services in whatever shape or form are highly visible. And the beauty of that, of course, is you can learn from the best. So you only have to look at, some of the big SaaS providers, whether it's Zoom, or MailChimp or any of these guys, and look at study their, become a student of pricing, study their pricing pages, and a lot of them publish it. And I can't think of any that don't have tiered pricing or have a freemium model. And look at what's good about them and work out why it's good. So work out from your perspective as a customer or as a seller, why is their pricing model good? And what you tend to see are some similarities over and over. They tend to have 3 or no more than 4 very clear packages or prices. The price points are very clearly spaced, and there's always a high price point for the premium option or the enterprise option, if you want to call it that, because they know hardly anybody's going to buy that. But it's the other two options that for most people, it's the decision between the entry price, the £10 a month price, or the middle price, £15 a month, £20 a month. And the trick is in understanding that when you present people with prices like that, most people are going to pick the middle one, right? It's just a force of nature. So we can't afford the most expensive price, yet we don't want to buy the cheapest option. So we tend to pick the middle one. So you need to structure your pricing options to encourage people to pick the middle one most of the time. So having a sensible ratio between your entry price, your middle price, and your premium price. And then the key is to get the number of features or services in your package structured correctly. So put everything you've got in your premium option, put the minimum viable products in your entry option, and the mistake people make there is to overspec that option, that entry option, and give too much away. Then the hardest decision you've got to make is, what are the key levers that are going to make people upgrade from entry to standard at the indicated price? And that's the real trick. So as I said, look at, people like Zoom, people like promo.com. There's loads of great examples out there, and ask yourself, how much more am I being asked to pay, and what do I get as a result? Because that's the thinking process that your buyers will go through. What is the difference in price, and what's the difference in value that I get, and is it worth it for me? And the beauty of that approach is it's a lot easier to sell, right? Because you can say to your customers, here are the options, here are the price points. You can clearly see what you get at each price. You choose the one you want. You choose the service that's appropriate for your needs at a price that you're willing to pay, which is far easier than just going all in and saying, well, my price is £10 a month or £100 a month, or whatever the number is. Yeah. So providing options and choice is one of the most powerful things you can do to improve your pricing.
I think that's excellent advice, and I think that's probably the clearest summary I've had of that, because we recently started a SaaS-based business as well, and I think after naming the company, pricing was probably the hardest thing to do, right? And in an odd way. And I think we played around with pricing so many times that you kind of forget why you made the decisions. So I think it's a very, very, very clear way of looking at it. So if people have listened to you so far and like what they hear, how can they find you? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so people can find me on my website, which is markpeacock.co.uk, or on LinkedIn, Mark Peacock, the Pricing Coach. Those are the two main portals that I use. So feel free, if you either want to follow me, follow my content. I tend to do quite a few webinars, often post articles on pricing hints and tips. So hopefully there's plenty of interest there that people will get value from.
And I can say that my team have been on the course, and they've enjoyed every minute of it. And actually, it's probably the most enthusiastic I've seen them on
great
courses.
Well, that's
great
to hear.
Recently.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just out of curiosity on my part, have there been any kind of major pricing blunders that you've seen recently? They've been out there, like in big companies.
Oh gosh,
there may not have been.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything directly. No doubt after this call, I'll think of one and think, oh yes, I should have mentioned that. I think the biggest blunder stroke mistake and this happens in big businesses, right, just as much as it happens in small businesses, and I've seen this in my corporate life, is that we tend to overstate, particularly in bigger businesses, the importance of unit costs and competitors, and we don't think enough about customers and value. So we get really hung up on unit costs, cost to deliver, and it's you absolutely need to know your unit costs and your break-even points and all of this kind. I'm not saying that's not important, but we tend to overstate it, and then we use that as the basis for calculating our prices, i.e. cost plus margin pricing. And that's cost plus margin pricing is one of the biggest or the least optimal pricing strategies there are in the entire world. Yet everybody does it because everybody does it. So everybody thinks that must be the right way to do pricing. But it's the most basic approach that you can use. And I would encourage everybody to become a student of pricing and think about different ways to price what you do. And as I said, I put up a slide in my talks called 50 pricing strategies, and none of them are difficult. There's lots of different ways to think about pricing. So rather than just sticking to the same old cost plus margin or competitor-based pricing, have a look at different pricing strategies: tier pricing, subscription pricing, price anchoring, decoy pricing. There's loads, and they're once you get your head around them, a light bulb will come on, and you think, oh my God, that can make such a difference to our business and to our proposition. Yeah, we'd never even thought of it before. So don't get stuck in the mud with same old pricing strategies, and be more creative with your pricing and think more laterally. That would be my advice, I think, for anybody that's looking at their pricing at the moment.
So my final question for you there, Mark, is if you go back in time 20 years and give advice to your younger self, what would that advice be?
Yeah, I think I would say to myself, take more risks and do more things more quickly. I think if I look back, particularly in my corporate life, I think I probably stayed in a couple of roles longer than I should have, and I should have moved on more quickly. So I would definitely say now, and I think this applies whether you're in a job or running your own business, take more risks and do things more quickly. Create new products, create new prices, move into new markets, and learn from your mistakes. I definitely, if I was going back 20 years, that's what I'd say to myself, and say, get on with it. Stop being risk averse and just get on with it, and you'll be fine.
And I think that's an interesting thing to say, especially now in the time that we're going to go into now with COVID.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, shall I make that jump? Shall I do it now?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, Mark. It's been great talking to you.
Pleasure. Yeah, it's been a real treat talking to you and your audience, Bhairav, and hopefully they've got a few useful tips or something interesting to think about at the very least.
Definitely, and it's markpeacock.co.uk, right? For the,
That's it. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's it.
Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you.